Alright, so the Beatles. Let's talk about Here, There, and Everywhere, one of my favorite songs. Now, this song has a lot to it, and I'm going to try to go over all the different aspects of it. So, first, we're going to talk about the form, then, we're going to talk about production, we're going to talk about some rhythm things, and then we're going to talk about the harmony and melody, and I'm going to get on the guitar and show you some of that stuff. But before we jump in, just want to quickly plug my debut album. It's called Rest Unrest. It's going to be out October 20th. If you're in the future, you can check it out. All the links are going to be in the description. Check it out if you'd like. But anyway, let's dive into it. So first, let's talk about the form. The form of the song is kind of short because it's actually only a few minutes long, but really we have a few main sections. We have what I would call the intro, and then we have the verse where all the instruments come in. There's really two parts to the verse. There's the first half and the second half. The second half is kind of when it goes to that minor bit, but I would consider that all the verse because, well, it repeats every time. There's no first part without the second part. Then we have a second verse, and then it jumps into the chorus. The chorus is when it jumps to the key of B flat. We'll talk about the harmony in a second. Then it goes back to verse, then chorus one more time, then it goes back to verse, and then we have an outro. It's a very simple and straightforward song. If you're a songwriter and you're watching this and you're like, why should I concern myself with the form? Well, the form is one kind of like package where you can kind of arrange things. So, for example, one thing you can do is be like, I want to write a song like Here, There, and Everywhere, or I want to write a Beatles-esque song, and then kind of put yourself in the confinements of this form, write something, and see what comes out. It's a cool exercise. You don't necessarily have to release it, but you could get some really cool results, and like if you want to get more into the Beatles music, that's one way to do it. But anyway, now let's talk about the production, which I'm particularly excited about because the Beatles productions are so interesting. Now, if you've ever gone on Instagram and seen those like charts, like this is how you should pan things, or like you've seen those like rules of like, oh, bass should always be in the center, snare and kick should always be in the center, and blah blah blah. I really like this song because it's in blatant defiance of that sort of thing. So in this arrangement, one thing that's really interesting is the panning. So around that time, they were still getting used to 4 and 8-track tape machines, and they didn't really have the full total control of what we have today. If I'm not mistaken, it might have been on a 4-track or a 2-track that this was recorded on, but don't exactly trust me. But around this time, the engineers basically had to get really crafty about panning. It's not like today in the DAW where you can just like pan everything left or right and you have like unlimited tracks and all that stuff. You had tape machines. Essentially, one tape was going to be the left speaker and one tape was going to be the right speaker, and a lot of the stuff was actually mixed in mono. But for this song, one thing in particular that was really interesting was that the whole band was panned on the right. So the rhythm guitar was all the way in the right ear, the bass was on the right ear, and then the drums were on the right ear as well. That leaves the left wide open, and what was occupying the left space was actually just the background vocals. So that's one way that the engineer basically crafted the space, so that way everything was super clear. There was nothing in the way of like the background vocals because there's nothing else in the left ear. Your left ear is only having that. Some people would also warn against having a bass hard pan because you can get ear fatigued a lot that way. But back in that time, there wasn't any headphones. Actually, while editing and reflecting on this, I actually lied to you. Headphones were invented in 1910. So never mind. The version I listened to was the latest remastered version, so this actually could have changed from the original mixing, but I found that really interesting. And what's interesting is that if you turn off your right speaker and you only listen to the left side, you actually hear a little bit of bleed from the band. This was actually probably the bleed from the lead vocals. That's Paul McCartney singing the lead vocals, and he doubled this. And essentially, when you're doubling, all you do is record the same part twice. Now, since we're human beings, we can't exactly get the exact part right both times. So there's going to be like slight little tiny discrepancies that you have to listen really close for, and you hear them. But those actually kind of make it sound bigger and fuller. So essentially, one of them went on the left, one of them went on the right, but there's two of them, and that's sort of how it cuts through the mix so well. And you hear that in both ears, and it appears mono because you're getting almost the same sound out of both ears. Another cool thing is that in the chorus, they have this one chromatic line, do 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 do, that is coming in from the lead guitar. That is actually a guitar doubled, and that only happens with that one line in the chorus. And then towards the end, actually, in the last chorus, you hear snaps on 2 and 4, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, it sounds kind of far away and reverby. Now, actually, what I assume is that they decided to snap while they're doing the background vocals, but I wasn't there, so I don't know. This comes in around the timestamp 156, but actually at 152, you can kind of hear like a faint one. So it may be someone came in early and they couldn't erase it because it was on the same track as the background vocals. I'm not going to play it because I don't want YouTube copyrights to come after me, but definitely go check that out. And then there's also very subtle reverb and EQ and all that stuff, but it doesn't sound like there was any extreme processing. It sounded like a pretty organic recording to me. And now let's talk about the rhythm. Honestly, there's not that much to talk about with the rhythm in this track. But basically, you have an 8-note subdivision, meaning 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, that's kind of the underlying pulse that's going on, and Ringo kind of leans into that a little bit. And it's a little syncopated when you listen to the rhythm guitar. It's like dung gung gang gung 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 gang. 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you're unfamiliar with syncopation, all it is traditionally accenting the offbeat. Now this is beats 2 and 4, so it's not quite the offbeat, but if you kind of like zoom out a little bit, 2 and 4 are the offbeats of a measure. Like if 1 and 3 are downbeats, they're the strong beats, then 2 and 4 are going to be the offbeats. The snapping later in the tune is also syncopated, so that kind of adds to the feel. And for one final moment of interjection, I also forgot to mention that the intro is rubato, meaning it's out of time, or it's time with like a moving pulse. So instead of having a steady 1, 2, 3, 4, it's kind of like you know, it's kind of like gestural. It's not exactly following the regular pulse that we follow. But now finally, let's look at the melody and the harmony. Cool, so now that I got the guitar, this song is in the key of G major. So the first chord is a G chord. So the first melody statement is this, which is actually a D, a G, a B, and a D again. That's actually just a G major triad starting on the 5th. So then there it goes to a B minor chord. What's interesting about that is that he goes, better life. That's a D natural note. Plays a B minor chord, and D is a third of B minor. Now the next chord is this kind of interesting pivot chord, but it's really foreshadowing what's to come. So we go from a B minor to a B flat. Now Paul's not singing the D natural anymore over this B flat, but the D natural is actually the third of B flat major chord. What's really interesting about the B flat is that it's also the flat 3 chord, and it's also what's called a borrowed chord. So essentially the borrowed chord is when you're borrowing for the parallel minor. If you've never heard of parallel minor, if we have G major, G minor is a parallel minor. And when you're in the key of G minor, you're really in the key of B flat major. So we're just borrowing a chord from G minor. So basically they're sort of pivoting on Paul's melody note. If you look at the difference between B minor and B flat, you have B, D, and F sharp, and B flat major has B flat, D, and F natural. So everything's just going down a half step. Parallel 5th, sorry Bach. But anyway, the next melody part goes, which is actually just a B flat major chord starting on the 5th as well, doing exactly the same thing as it did before. So first we have, so we have the same shape happening twice, but just going up a minor third. This might be called sequencing when you look at it in classical music. It could also be not sequencing, up to you. We then have a 2 chord, which is the A minor. It's the chord going back into the G. And then we have a 5 chord. So it's A minor, D7, and it's kind of anchoring on this D natural. I really like the D natural on the A minor chord because we get an A minor add 4. Maybe an A minor 11, but we're not necessarily adding a 7th, so I wouldn't necessarily call it an 11. But it is high in range, so maybe. So then that concludes the intro. Now we get into the really meat and bones of the song. The melody goes, we have a G natural with a G chord. Simple enough. And then the next chord is an A minor over a G natural melody note. So we have an A minor 7th chord. I really like this sort of stagnant melody with moving chords. Has a really cool effect. Then in the next one might perceive that as B minor, but you can also perceive it as G over B, because if we look at the melody note, we have B, D, A, and G. Now that is exactly a G major triad, except for the A, but the A is the 9 or the 2nd. If we put the B at the bottom, this sounds to me more like a G major inversion more than a B minor chord. Partially because we don't have the perfect 5th, and a perfect 5th is a really strong interval. Then we go into the C major chord. Now that's hanging on the G melody note, so that's the 5th of the chord. And then we have B natural, and then we have E natural. Then back down to D natural, and we go back to the G major chord. So in this progression, we had 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 1, 2, 1, 6, which is essentially just a 1 chord, but in first inversion, meaning we put the 3rd in the bass. So if we have G, B, D, B is going to be in the bass, and then 4. And then we have the same thing again. instead of having the G in the melody, we have the D in the melody, so we get this A minor add 4 chord again, which is really cool because you see that you're reusing a lot of material, which makes it sort of easy for the listener to latch onto things if you're hearing a lot of similar things over and over. One might call it repetitive, I would probably call it clever or memorable. But anyway, then we get to this chord, B minor chord, we have B, C, D, E, and then we have a C major chord here. So we land on the E and we get the C major chord. E is a third of the C chord. So notice we're like hanging on a lot of chord tones. This is something that's happening a lot. In my opinion, the music that sounds really melodic is music that hangs on the chord tone, specifically hangs on a lot of thirds. So this would be no exception to that. Then we have the notes G, which is the fifth of C, A, then B. And then the next chord is like an F sharp diminished. I'm putting in the seventh, so I'm making it half diminished. And B is a perfect fourth of the F sharp diminished. Then we have B7. Okay, so this is probably a video with the most interjections, but I also realized another thing. When I was editing this video, I was like, wait, why would the Beatles use a half diminished chord? That doesn't make that much sense. Because it's a guitar playing, not a piano. It's actually just an F sharp minor chord to a B major chord. I added in the seventh because I'm a dumb, dirty jazz boy, but like, yeah, it's just to try it. By now, this is like the third shirt that you've seen on me. Sorry about that. Anyway, back to the video. So when you see this kind of motion, like from F sharp to B, which is a perfect fourth, and you have a minor-ish chord, like a half diminished, to a dominant chord, that's usually a 2-5. Then we have, again, the same thing, B, C, B, B again. And then we have A, and then to G. And then we go to the E minor chord. And if we look at that, that's actually a minor 2-5 to E minor. Then we have the melody G, A, B, F sharp to an A major chord. This is the dominant 2 chord in the key of G, which is also a popular substitution. And then we have F sharp, E, and then A, and then it goes to A minor. This is actually a really common one in jazz, to go to the dominant 2 chord before going to the minor chord. But anyway, it goes to A minor and then D major or D7, and then we're back into G major. Then we have another verse happening again. Then for the second verse, it actually goes. So the melody goes A, B flat, C, and then D. So we land on this B flat chord that we saw again at the intro. The intro was foreshadowing this moment here. Now we're going to the minor third of G, which is B flat. We're modulating because we're changing keys. We're now in the key of B flat rather than the key of G major, but B flat is also the same key as G minor. So we're going to something related. We're not going to something completely out of nowhere. And basically they prep this in by playing a few notes from the B flat major scale. A, B flat, C, and then D, we're landing on the third. Remember what I said about landing on the third of chords? It sounds very melodic. And then the melody goes D, F, D, and then we go to G minor. The D is a fifth of G minor. And then it goes C, B flat, and then we have C minor, C, D, E flat, and then back to C. So here we just have a classic 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression. And this is in the new key. And basically it goes through that. You have that one lead guitar line going, which is an interesting chromatic line, but really we're just going from the third of B flat to the fifth of B flat and then back down. The notes in the middle are what are called passing tones and are just connecting the two. So this happens again. And then instead of repeating, it goes back to the same melody note, the D natural. But it goes to the G major chord and we have a G major arpeggio. We have D, B, and G, and A minor. And we go through another cycle of a verse. And then we repeat the verse, we have another chorus, and then we repeat the verse, and then finally we have the outro, which kind of riffs off of the sort of main ascending chord progression thing. So we have G major with the G on top, we have A minor with the G on top again, and then we have a B natural, which is a 9 of A minor. that melody line was D, B, G, which is a G major triad, which works out really well because we have D, which is a third of B minor, and we have B, which is the root of B minor, and then we land on G while also playing the C major chord. G is a fifth of the C major chord. Then it repeats. And then here goes to D natural. But instead of going down to B natural, we go up D, F sharp, and then G. We got the nice half step voice leading, and if you see my video on half step voice leading, you'll know that it's the strongest level voice leading. And then we get the G natural, which is the fifth of C again, and then we have this G major chord. This in classical music is what's called a plagal cadence, because we go from the 4 chord back to the 1 chord. And that's about it for the harmony of the song. And if you're watching this as a jazz musician, you might be thinking, man, this sounds kind of similar. There's a lot of jazz standards that actually use very similar progressions. Skylark is one of them. Let me know if you want to see a video of me comparing Here, There, and Everywhere to Skylark. But yeah, if you want to hear a solo guitar version of me playing Here, There, and Everywhere, you can find it here. If you want to hear a version of me playing Skylark, you can also find that here. This is with a trio. But yeah, that's about it for today. So thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for sticking around. If you've enjoyed it, like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next video. Take care.